Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the first of the afternoon sessions. My name's Scott Simpson. I'm the Head of Libraries at East Renfrewshire Culture and Leisure. And the session that I'm chairing today is supporting cultural democracy and wellbeing, libraries and fund policies. And I'm delighted to welcome Lindsey Henderson and Lewis Hou. Lindsey has spent the best part of the last 15 years championing the power of libraries, holding various posts at libraries throughout the Lothians, and now as head of programme at Ceilidh. She spent much of the last 2 years researching and co-authoring Forward Scotland's Public Library Strategy 2021 to 2025. And now delighting, it says here, in helping to bring it to life. Those 2 years have also seen Lindsey and Lewis collaborate on the Fun Palace ambassadorship, from which she has learned icebreaker sessions from the master himself, but is still, sadly, woefully below average in the Ceilidh skills. But there's plenty of time for that to change. Lewis advocates for a Scotland where everyone's creativity, curiosity and well-being are fundamentally valued. He directs Science Ceilidh, an award-winning organisation connecting communities, education, research and culture across Scotland, and is one of the Scottish ambassadors with the Fun Palaces campaign for cultural democracy with Ceilidh. Okay, so the bad news, I'm told, is apparently there's some audience participation. So, too late, the door's shut. And with that, I will hand over.
I'll come up. Good afternoon, everyone. Good to be here. Don't worry, it's not, there's no Ceilidh involved today, I'm afraid. I know. Maybe another time. There is evidence that Lindsey has Ceilidh before that in that picture, but she's woefully just cropped out of shot. Just to begin with, one of our favourite ways of introducing cultural democracy is actually with a bit of a thought experiment, a bit of an icebreaker. And actually, given that we've just had a rather heavy lunch, a very tasty one, I wanted to begin us thinking about, well, you're here as librarians, as professionals in your field, but I want you to think about, well, what are the types of things that you do for yourself? You as a member of your community, as an amateur, as someone who likes to try different things. And so my first question for you, we're going to use something called Mentimeter, and I'm sure many of you may use it. If you have your phone, you can scan this QR code. And the question is, what things do you do that aren't related to your professional self, you don't get paid for, but make you feel happy, give you a bit of spark of joy, support your well-being, but also connect you to your community. And we're going to make a bit of a word cloud collectively using this approach. So hopefully, if it's working for folks, if the QR code doesn't work, then we're going to transition to the slides, and you can also just go to menti.com, and I'll give you the number very shortly. I'll just take a moment. If it has worked for you, hopefully what you should see is a question asking for 3 words. Is that right? Give me a nod. Fantastic. So you can tell me what you do in your spare time that you enjoy, that makes you feel happy, well, and connects you to your communities. All right, and I'm going to transition, please, to the tech gods. There we go. To hopefully this over here. Fantastic. Now, if the QR code didn't work, you can also go to menti.com, and the code is just up there as well. But I think it seems to be working for most of you. We've got a lot of walkers here, readers, shock horror. Surprised that's not the first one, actually, but anyway. Gardening, cooking, singing, dancing, that's all to come. Fantastic. Volunteering. Brilliant. You're quite a talented bunch, eh? Now, the reason we start off with this, very often if we do this as a workshop, we might encourage people to think of these ideas, and then we will actually, the next question is, well, what types of things would you always wanted to have tried? And then build connections between who's in the room. So who's got certain passions and things that you don't do as your professional self, And how can we build a community and activities around that? And actually, we could theoretically do a fun palace here and now. We could forego the next 40 minutes, Lindsey, and we would just do a fun palace, and we'd share some of these skills. And the reason why we demonstrate this, to begin with, is cultural democracy, the way I define it, is all about celebrating this. So all these things that you do as a member of your community, that connects you, that makes you feel well, all this stuff is incredibly valuable. You know it because you do it. This is the stuff in communities that we want to shout about. And very often, when we talk about culture with a capital C, we think about what's funded. We think about the kind of high art. We think about the institutions of arts and culture as opposed to this. And what we want to say as a campaign with Fun Palaces is that this in our communities is fundamental. This is the bedrock of communities, and this is what we want to shout about. This is valuable. It might not be shiny, might not be professional, but this is vitally important. And again, trying to challenge maybe some of that hierarchy that sometimes happens when you have an expert artist that comes in. And I'm a big advocate for expertise in arts and heritage, of course, but there's a balancing act that we need to provide space to celebrate this as well. And there's something really empowering about celebrating this. I think it's more inclusive when we broaden what counts as culture. So with that in mind, just another question to get us thinking a little bit is, well, what does leadership in culture and well-being look like for libraries then? This is the question, this is the name of our session today. What does that mean to you? So if you're on the Mentimeter, you can add you can share a thought. I'd be really interested into thinking about, well, what does that mean? What does that spark? What challenges does that mean? But I'm also going to give you actually 3-4 minutes actually to speak to your neighbor. I know. So go find someone next to you, have a little chat about this, and then towards the end of it, you can start adding your ideas. And just as an icebreaker, tell them perhaps what of those many talents, especially if there's someone that you knew well, did you share as well, just to get us started. But 3 or 4 minutes thinking about, well, what does leadership and culture and well-being mean? What are the challenges behind that? And perhaps my provocation, and certainly with Lindsey as well, is how much of that is about handing over? Ooh. Okay, I'll take that back. We'll unpack that. Have a wee chat. I'll see you in 3-4 minutes. Oh, yes. I don't know. I think it beats every card. Actually, I think just after lunch is maybe the way of saying it. So time-wise, we're okay. I think I'll just give it another 2 or 3 minutes, ask people to make some suggestions, and then I'll start. And I'm going to give myself a time for 10 minutes because I want to be. I've actually put little maybe just a minute or so longer. And if you want to start adding your reflections onto the Mentimeter, that'll be very welcome as well. What was that? Exploit staff talents. Hopefully in a positive sense, I think. Tap into it. Okay, I can start seeing people adding some really interesting suggestions on the board. So community-led activities, openness, respecting diversity, empowering people. Community at the heart of all decision-making and speaking in a language that is understood and relevant. Some really, really nice ones here. And I'll be able to share this to you at the very end. If you want to add your emails, there's a wee, just basically you can submit your email and I'll send this out to you as well if you'd like, because I think some really insights here and lots of resonance with the work that we do with Fun Palaces. So this will still keep rolling, so you can keep adding as we go along, but I'm very keen, if I can move, just to give a little bit of context perhaps. Is this right? There we are. Okay. So I think this is obviously the slide that we've just talked about, and I think maybe within a lot of the suggestions, there's a lot of around, and I kind of threw it out there at the very beginning, maybe too soon after lunch, but this idea of handing over space, and that's very much at the heart of Fun Palaces, and a lot of those definitions that you've just shared, we would absolutely agree with. I think we come from a space where we almost, I mean, the sentiment around empowering is really important, but actually, for us, I don't actually think it's possible to empower anybody. What we can do is we can provide space for people to empower themselves. And actually, one of the founders of Fun Palaces, Stella Duffy, talks a lot about conpowerment, because I'm going to empower you still takes this kind of deficit kind of approach where, oh, well, I've got something to share with you. But what we can do is bring space, facilities, convening, and support capacity, real capacity building to actually enable people to develop what they would like themselves as well. And I think that's really, again, that talking about the diversity of all the skills in this room, that value, it's not a them, us, professional versus amateur, but actually it's about looking at that ecosystem. And again, really being aware of the power that spaces like libraries have. Libraries, and I remember starting with Slick and talking to Lindsey, and a space where you don't have to pay any money to learn and have access to everything. That, in today's society, shouldn't be as radical as it is, but that is radical. And you are year-round Fun Palaces. And I should maybe break down the terminology of the term. It is a difficult term. It comes from theatre. Fun Palace was conceived by a theatre maker called Joan Littlewood. It was a palace of the people. It was a place where it would break down the barriers and people can go and do arts and science and make and explore and connect with their communities. And as I usually follow on with, i.e. a library. And not surprisingly, when we do Fun Palaces, we have a year-round action, so we do work around cultural democracy, but we also have a weekend of action, which is, for many of you who have been involved, it's the first weekend of October. And this is when we shout about all the skills that you've just talked about, the fact that communities, all the skills that librarians bring, but maybe not facilitating it, but holding space, enabling communities to celebrate the skills that they already have, and that fundamental message behind that. So the campaign itself, one of our manifesto aims is believing in the genius in everyone, that creativity in the community can change the world for the better. And it is a human right to be able to support that. And I think it separates us a little bit from, if you think of cultural democracy, you also have the democratizing of culture. And that's to say, okay, we have a predefined idea of what culture is, and we're going to make that more accessible. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. That is really important. But what cultural democracy is trying to say is, well, why is this culture, why is this person's creativity valued more than other people's? And again, that is what we shout about in our weekend of action. And it is a terrible term, I admit. And so I remember running a community workshop, and I had a great lady to say, well, so it's just about making culture and not just consuming it. And again, I think that really encapsulates that spirit of what we're trying to encourage. And again, how you can hold space so people can actually accept that the creatives they have, the culture, the heritage, the knowledge that they have is also valuable. That lived expertise is expertise. So how do we support it? So there's a few things. One is we've been working with Ceilidh for the last 3 years, two and a half. Over the pandemic, and one of the things we were really keen about is developing the leadership. We've already have a lot of fun palace makers who are libraries in Scotland and across the UK. And with the pandemic, we had to very quickly pivot. And one thing that we really recognized was that there was a need for cross-sector support. And very often, as you will know yourselves, libraries are not necessarily seen as a place for culture and well-being. They're seen for books, but as we all know, libraries are much more than just books. So what I was really keen to do is think about, well, how can we provide a space that brought different sectors, yes, the arts organizations, but also if you're a grassroots community group, where do you go if you're interested in culture and well-being? So how can we bring the museums and the third sector organizations and talk about all the issues that we're all facing, the challenges of preaching, going beyond the converted, equity, diversity, real inclusion, hybrid approaches, young people taking the lead, climate change, and the intersections with well-being. And so we supported the Culture and Wellbeing Community Network Scotland. It's a terrible name. We should come up with a shorter one. But it's a really informal group because, again, we appreciate it as very light touch. Lots of things were going on. It's the pandemic. It's still the pandemic. And so what this is we have monthly conversations, we have a mailing list, and we have a Facebook group just to try and get people speaking and sharing different resources together and being really boldly cross-sector, but also embedding libraries in the heart of that conversation, because we know there's so much good practice that you do within your communities around culture and well-being. The second thing we do, the second thing we do is we support local activities during the weekend of action. As I said, many of you have been involved in that. Some of them have been, we've taken a very hybrid approach, sometimes focusing the hyper-local, the very small connections, but also thinking about online. And we've looked at things like hosting challenges, which kind of libraries can do, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, and also Fun Palace Scotland TV, which try to talk a point when if people are isolating, how could they connect with other people? And again, using online as a way of doing that. And I know that's not perfect, but again, trying to encourage these kind of hyper-local connections and conversations as well. So we've talked about the challenges, so connecting particularly to the big themes of well-being, climate action, equity, and play. And then finally, and this is what we're moving towards with Lindsey and Ceilidh, is developing further resources and training. We've had so many conversations with librarians and with other cultural agents and elements. How can we put this together to actually support that and think about how we can bring that forward into the leadership and recognize within the wider cultural sector the space and leadership that libraries play in that. So hopefully we're developing, synthesizing a lot of this that we've been doing over the last 2 or 3 years over the next couple of months, and then developing that into a CPD package, and then lots of more resources. And of course, continuing those conversations on the network. So what does that look like in practice? I'll quickly check how I'm doing for time. Okay. So here's a few examples that I really love that I've drawn from some of the people in this room, in fact. Handing over, that was one of the suggestions, and I think Orkney Libraries a few years ago did this in a really interesting way. They put posters up for weeks beforehand. You can see, we need your help. It was a literal takeover. When I talk to the team, every inch of Orkney Libraries was taken over by locals, people who use the libraries, who volunteered guitar making workshops, Lego workshops, choirs. They had D&D, which I'm personally a big fan of, and it was all suggested by members of the community who then took over for that weekend. And you can see some of the images over there. We've had some really interesting intersections with science, so Midlothian Science Festival, for example, and Midlothian Libraries did 1 year try to reach out and kind of, again, take that same narrative around actually everyone is curious about the world. Everyone has some knowledge and interests, and so it's not always about putting the expertise on scientists. And so opening up, we've had Fife do something very similar. So this is out in Dunfermline, where they literally allow people to paint the walls over the Fun Pals weekend and really take over. And then we've had how it connects with things like climate change. So we have, with Western Isles Libraries, lots of different fun palaces looking very different, but again, providing that space for play and for, and just, well, for fun, actually. I know fun is a dirty word when it comes to sometimes this type of policy and all this really serious stuff, but there is a power in that brings us together. So that's on the ground, what happens, but we've also got our Fun Palace challenges, which we trialed last year, and I thought this was a nice way of acknowledging that, yes, it's a difficult time, librarian capacity is hard, it is challenging at the moment very often, but actually how could we potentially do something before the Fun Palace weekend that encouraged people to connect with libraries and do something different? And these challenges connected to those 4 themes I mentioned beforehand, so climate change, play, equity, and health and well-being. And so you can see a lot of the libraries that were involved. They offered a short provocation, a challenge to their community, encouraging people to respond and do a short video with us. And I'm going to share one of those videos, actually, from someone that you would have seen earlier, from in Murray, in Elgin. But just to give you a flavour of what that looks like. Hopefully this plays.
We think reading is the best way to relax.
We challenge you to show us your book that helps you unwind.
Hi Adele, what book helps you unwind?
Ant Middleton, First Man.
What's that about?
It's about Ant Middleton and his real life experiences when he was in a war zone situation.
That sounds great. Thank you.
So Thomas, what book helps you unwind?
The boy at the back of the class.
Can you describe it to us?
It's about a boy from a different country who moves into the UK and his friends help him try to settle in. In the process, they have to open the gates so that the boy's parents can enter the UK as well.
Well, that's really cool.
Hello, Kaya. What book helps you unwind?
Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief.
Do you know why it helps you unwind?
It helps me unwind because it's not got a lot of words and it's also very interesting.
Brilliant. Sounds awesome. Thank you.
We challenge you to share a picture of your book and tell us why it helps you unwind.
Or share a picture of you and your book and tell us why it helps you unwind.
Please include the hashtags FP Challenges and at Library at EA.
Is Ceilidh here, by the way? No, that's okay. But this video was made by the pupils, as you can see, completely taken over by them, and we just provided a little bit of support with the video itself and shared it. And so really fun, hopefully getting the word out, and something that we're really hoping to make a bit more of as we go forward as well with these types of amazing contributions. Oh, let's not do that again. One last maybe example, again, with Fun Palace Challenges and linking what with Fun Palace Scotland TV is something we did with Stirling Libraries. And so Stirling Libraries, the first year with Fun Palace, when we went online, did a great set of Fun Palace TV where they got a lot of their staff to share their hidden talents, a little bit like I've just done before, just connecting with the community in different ways. So we had members of staff show macrame, which I finally learned what that was, and some fiddle players and things like this as well. And then the second year, well, what was nice about that was, one, that really helped in terms of the digital approach, which then informed their work moving forward. And I take no response, I think that was absolutely on them, but it gave them a bit of confidence to support their digital approach. But also, I just wanted to share this. So last year, they did a big bookmark challenge for the Fun Palace Challenge. And so they asked members of the community to come in, show them bookmarks and respond to different kind of texts that they had. And I'm not going to read it out here and now, but I'm going to share a link to it. But you can see some of the things that people made. So you see that lovely basket and felts, and they brought it into libraries, but also a poem that someone wrote in response to a text as part of Fun Palace Weekend as well, which I'm not going to read, but given the current time, rereading back was really quite emotional. And so I think hopefully providing just that opportunity, that space for us to move forward. Now, last thing before I move on to Lindsey and how this fits into Slick and libraries and moving forward, is just a bit about the Culture and Wellbeing Community Network. We've already got lots of conversations on there. Again, you can see that in each of these conversations around the climate action, mental health, inclusion, moving co-production online, we've got libraries, librarians, members in those conversations, and you can access them, and we're going to repackage them as well to make it a little bit more consumable if you don't want to listen to the whole hour. So, hopefully you can join us on there. We're going to share with you those links, but I want to then bring on Lindsey to talk about how this fits in with Slick's public library strategy. Thank you.
Thanks, Lewis. I've started to realise that I always follow Lewis's inspirational speech with a chat about policy and strategy, so I apologise. I hope you don't fall asleep. In the next 8 minutes, it's going to be whistle-stop, I promise. So Lewis and I's partnership as an ambassador through Slick was meant to be a completely different 2 years. He joined us in November 2019, and then by March 2020, we were obviously living through absolute chaos and turmoil. And we had to pivot really quickly into a completely new delivery where we're going to be on the road across Scotland, inspiring people in terms of cultural democracy. And suddenly we found ourselves running online workshops once a week for sometimes 2 hours. I don't know how we did that in the middle of COVID. We eventually moved to about once every 8 weeks, but the start-off period, it was fairly intense. But in preparing for today, it's made me really think about the relationship that Slick and Fun Palaces have had and the impact that that's had on developing a new public library strategy for Scotland. And I didn't actually realise quite how many threads run through that strategy which have been influenced by the relationship with Fun Palaces. So this is the kind of overview of the strategy. If you've not picked one up, we've got a lovely stand next door, and we've got hot off the press hard copies for you to take home, as many as you want for every member of your team. Please take it away with you. So this is the kind of overarching principles or the vision, and then people, place and partnership are our kind of 3 strands that run through the strategy. The strategy was mandated in the Culture Strategy for Scotland in 2018-19. And one of the things that really stuck out to us was through the empowering culture strand, which obviously Lewis has already spoken about, was extending opportunity that enables people to take part in culture throughout their lives. And the relationship with Fun Palaces and Slick, that seemed to really resonate as a key strand. So we created 15 strategic aims, so 5 in each category. It did sit at 13 for a long time, and I thought there's no way I can publish 13 at anything, so we're going to have to invent some more. So this is what they look like. And in terms of the actual strategic aim, which was inspired by Fun Palaces, it sits at 2.4, so create a diverse cultural offer which celebrates local and national heritage and encourages community-led experiences. So that is directly from Lewis being an ambassador, us having a strategic relationship with Fun Palaces and the work that we did. But when I was looking through this yesterday, actually, when I was kind of finishing it off, I started to notice the amount of common threads that run through this. So if we look at 1.3, there's clearly a resonance there with empowering communities. And if we go on to the one at the very end, sorry, this text is really small, so my apologies, but I think Sean tends to upload them after, so you'll be able to look at them in more detail. So talking about diversity in communities and looking at programming, again, resonates with Fun Palaces. People-centred design principles, again, who we are, that relationship coming through in the strategy. 1 to 2.2, so design and library services, yet again, here we are, Fun Palaces running through. And then the last one, 3.1, talking about developing partnerships which support more resilient, fairer and healthier communities. Actually, if you were kind of being pedantic, there's probably a thread from Fun Palaces which could run through all of those. I'm sure you could argue the toss. If you looked at them, you could see that there was connections with the work that we've done with Fun Palaces. Then it got Lewis and I thinking about, again, where the connections lie with fund policies, with SLIC, with public library strategy. Where do all those connections come together? And one of the key things, and actually where the magic happens in public libraries that we all see, is where people are able to come into a library and have a new experience. That picture at the top of the lady with the VR headset on still remains one of my absolute favourite pictures, because it's just joyful. And public libraries are actually really good at curating experiences to make people feel joy and to spark joy within people. But what we have spoken about frequently, and Lewis and I schedule 1 hour meetings, and it never ever stops at 1 hour. We get into some crazy impassioned conversation, and before we know it, we're like, God, actually we really need to go and get some work done. But what we've been talking about a lot recently is that there's almost still a level of discomfort in moving from programming experiences to help people spark joy, like we see in that top picture, and handing over those spaces for people to create their own experiences that spark that joy. And throughout the development of the public library strategy, we heard so many different terms which came from right across the globe. So we were lucky enough to do virtual visits in Australia, the Netherlands, in other parts of Scandinavia and the United States. And we heard such rich descriptions of libraries, things like it was the community's living room, that it was the people's workshop, that it was like an indoor town square, which was undercover. And those were the things that really struck us as to how people feel, how the library space makes them feel. And Lewis and I frequently talk about if we could hand over that curation where people can program what's in that space, and it's their programming that makes them, that sparks that joy within them. How transformational could that be? So in terms of policy and strategy and the relationship that SLIC have with fund policies and the relationship that public libraries have with cultural democracy, our next extended part of the ambassadorship, because we're going to keep it going because we think it's been a really positive experience, is to look at how we inspire and have conversations with leaders to really think about handing over that programming of culture and actually creating spaces where people spark joy within themselves by sharing their own skills and their own talents and their own stories and their own things that make them feel alive, and how we create that space and empower leaders to do that. I think that is probably where we finish today. We'll share our contact details. If anybody wants to get in contact with us, tweet us, email us, start a conversation. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to have a conversation.
Can I quickly just
yeah.
Thanks, Lindsay. And I think, sorry. And just maybe to emphasize that, so actually, again, this is just a short introduction. There are a lot of challenges to this approach. We really acknowledge that, the challenge of digital. Is there an appetite for digital anymore in terms of the response? You know, are we a bit saturated? How do we really work with communities who are overlooked and really hand that power over? So we know that's not easy, but if you want to continue that conversation, we are holding a summit in August. The date is to be finalised very soon, but if you want to be kept in touch and been sent some of these resources, and also there's some physical fund palace and libraries resources as well. If you use that, you can either give it me your email, or if you just use that QR code, you can put your email down and I'll email you the slides and any of these dates and all these resources as well. So we can keep that conversation going, but of course, you know where me and Lindsay are as well. So thank you. A massive thank you to our Fund Pals makers who are here, and massive thank you for listening.
Thank you very much. So we do have time for some questions before the next session. Don't worry, we won't be launching microphones at you, but we do have a roving one if anybody has a question to ask. Just let yourselves be known. Stunned silence. Oh yes, question down at the front. Just toss it.
Thanks for not tossing the microphone. My question's actually, it's a really boring one, I think. It's about space and the challenges of adapting libraries to kind of these multimodal ways of engaging with culture.
Thank you. We have thought about this change in space. part of the strategy, there's another strategic aim in the strategy about space design within libraries, and actually coming back from closed library spaces due to the pandemic about, should you come back and keep your space exactly how it is, or is this a chance to think about how we evaluate how we use the space, what we do with the space? Is there things we need to let go of to use the space more effectively? So we commissioned workshops and a toolkit with Nomad, who are here tomorrow. They're doing a workshop tomorrow to get people to think about what we use library spaces for now and how we optimise them. So they, that is their background. They are consultants that go in when services are building a new library or when they're remodelling a library, and they go in and think about space optimisation, how to make major structural changes, but also how to make smaller changes in the space that you've already got. So there is now an active toolkit called it's Forward. That's where the inspiration for the strategy came from. That was originally called Forward. So there's a Forward toolkit which enables public library staff to think about the space they've got, how they make the best use of that. And so far, all heads of service in Scotland have had the opportunity to come and do a workshop with Nomad, and we've had 130 public library staff have come through interactive workshops with Nomad. We've done the first kind of 3-month evaluation of how staff found the workshops and if they think they can use it going forward, and we will continue to engage with them at 6 months, 9 months and 12 months to see how they are using the toolkit and if it's changing the way they think about library space and thinking the way they change about library service design. So we do know that some of the kind of statements we make in the strategy and what the direction that libraries should be moving in can be pretty radical, but we are kind of in the background trying to do the work to give people the tools and the training to kind of make those changes that mean that the kind of radical service changes can happen.
Okay, just conscious of the time and aware that the next session is coming in here very shortly, so we'll call a halt to it there. There are contact details up on the slide. If you do have any questions for Lewis and Lindsey, then please get in touch with them after this session. But we'll call it there, and if you just, again, show your appreciation for Lewis and Lindsey for today, we'll call it there. Thank you.